Welcome to Timeline on 7 Ditches. My guest today is a movement builder. He's the founder of Earth Hour. Maybe you know that because every year, once in a while, the light goes out for a complete hour. But now he's the general manager or CEO at the Circle Economy in Amsterdam. Andy Ridley.
Hi, how you going?
That was the best introduction I could give you.
Very good, very good, very good.
Yeah. Was it? Is it the way you'd like to be introduced, or are you more like an informal kind of guy?
No, it was fine.
Yeah,
that's pretty informal.
Well, most people would, if they know your name, they would know you from that, right? From Earth Hour,
yeah,
and because it spreads, it's spread out massively. So I guess everybody, you must have noticed it in one way or the other.
Yeah, it was a pretty interesting project to work on. I mean, we started with one city in Sydney.
2007.
Yeah. So it feels like a long while ago, and actually is quite a while ago. And by the end, it was like 7,000 cities and 160 plus countries. And actually, the coolest thing about it was not really the lights out bit, which is sort of famous for, but much more the idea of being able to mobilise hundreds of millions of people and to get really big conservation results driven from it, paradigital, all that kind of stuff. But, yeah, that was kind of why, or that was for me at least the most exciting thing about it.
You started off as like was it a communications officer at the World Nature Fund?
Yeah, well, no, I was born in England, and I moved to. I was running big concerts for a charity called the Prince's Trust and big campaigns for those guys, and I actually moved to Australia because I wanted to go diving on the Great Barrier Reef and places like that.
Sure.
And ended up staying there and running the communications team for WWF in Australia, and that's where I started Earth Hour from.
Yeah. So then we have the campaigner Andy in you, the communication Andy in you, and you've combined this to get a movement started to get the lights out. Well, this is.
Well, yeah. Look, I mean, for me, I was. Even when I was working in London on campaigns there, I mean, that was for disadvantaged youth. And I always thought that communications was massively underestimated in terms of what it can do to mobilise people, the power that's sort of sitting there latent and not being used, the power of people, the power of the crowd. And of course, with digital, that's become so much more accessible. So you can reach out to hundreds of millions of people. And if your reason is compelling enough, then you never know, you might actually be able to make something happen. So I actually think that in most things, if you talk about, we'll talk about circular economy later, but in most things, when you start to apply smart communications, the engagement possibilities are immense.
Yeah.
Often, it should, for me, that's a sort of a thing of hope, because some of the big things that we have to deal with.
And then, especially in this age, if you say we're in the digital age, you have the power with your phone to
look, we're the first. I mean,
extensive reach. Right?
Exactly right. We are the first generation in history that has the power to connect behind a common purpose, and like no other generation has ever had that possibility. Yeah. So, how do we utilise that? It's kind of a cool question.
Yeah, let's get your first tweet on the screen, because you're fairly active.
Reasonably.
Obviously, you're getting in touch with people, and this one stood out for me for the picture, and I can definitely advise our viewers to go and look at the entire, because it's a drone film of Our Planet is Beautiful. And is this your main motivation? Is this your why, to say so?
I have a few whys. I mean, I definitely am very motivated by, being outside, outdoors, the planet itself, and I think most people who get to see a lot of nature kind of are. But I find that one of my big motivations is sort of frustration, in a weird sort of way, because I felt that was definitely the case with Earth Hour. It's this idea that so often you think you can't do something, or that a problem is too big, and I like the idea of disrupting that and being able to go, well, how do we do this, and how would you do it, and how can you challenge assumptions that you can't change stuff? So
yeah, because
it doesn't necessarily mean I'm always successful, but that's kind of I'm frustrated by the idea of
it gets you going, gets you
a little bit, yeah.
Because I can understand that for a lot of people also this massiveness of if we're talking climate change, this is also what stops them from getting into action, because they think, well, I can stop that from where I am or what I do.
Yeah, I think so. I think that with climate change, and I've come to this position over a number of years, but I think with climate change, there's a certain point where everyone goes, oh shit, this is actually happening, and we're going to have to do something about it. But then, as you say, you know, most people are an individual. What can I do? And I think to say everybody can do something is kind of, to know that's important, but I think there's something kind of bigger than that as well. And for me, when I left Earth Hour, the big challenge for me was, okay, so how do you look at this systemic problem, not from a kind of what does an individual do, but how do you systemically look at changing things? And that's what circular economy is essentially about.
Yeah. Well, let's get to that. We'll put your next tweet on as well. Well, it's not even your tweet, but you were giving a presentation and people are talking about it. I just picked this one to illustrate that.
Yeah.
Circular economy, if you're online, and our viewers are a lot, you must come by this concept. But still, a lot of people don't really understand what it is. So you've become now the CEO of circular economy in Amsterdam, right?
Yeah.
So could you explain for me, like, circular economy in 2 minutes? Is it possible?
Yeah, I think it is. Although I think it's hard. I still think it's hard even after doing this job for a year. But it's essentially it's enough for everyone forever. I think in the States, like more than 90% of products are no longer in use after 6 months. So if you imagine we're already locked into 11 billion people on this planet, and we're using that much raw materials, so we dig it up, we make it into stuff, we throw it in the bin. There's no logic to it. That's linear economy. And the idea of circularity or circular economy is to kind of challenge that and go, right, so how, on one end, how do you, instead of burning coal for power, how do you always use renewables? That would be one part of it. But another part of it would be with every product, everything should be designed with its next life in mind. So if you took something like a computer, you'd be looking at it and going, okay, instead of making it like this is an Apple computer, therefore it's probably sealed. You can't reuse the components. It'll last for, let's say, 3 or 4 years, and then you won't be able to update the software set.
And this is what Apple wants, obviously.
That's what they want you to. That's what they want at the moment.
Buy a new one.
They want you to buy a new one, but then this one goes where it probably gets wasted.
To my kids, yeah.
Very, very low. Well, that's actually high value kind of reuse. That's certainly what will be happening for my kids. But for most things, they basically get either scrapped or burnt, or so their value goes from very expensive to buy to worth not very much. Circularity is always trying to find the most valuable way of reusing a product or keeping it in the system, so you don't have to dig up new components, you don't have to rebuild, so that's basically it.
But isn't this where it gets hard as well? Because as we just, in your example, we touched that example right away, is that Apple makes money by me coming into the store in every 2 or 3 years buying the latest product. So their business models are all about linear economy, and obviously their shareholders are also about linear economy. They all go for the short term.
No, we have a system that absolutely buys into the linear economy, but you can't kind of argue with the fact that you just can't keep doing that, because you're going to essentially run out of the raw materials that you need in order to make a computer or to make a light bulb or to make a car. And so there is an impending kind of pressure that you have to rethink that. So you take something like the textiles industry, right? It's the second most polluting industry in the world. I'm probably wearing right now more water in terms of how much water it took to make this shirt and these trousers than I'll drink in a year, right? So again, unsustainable. We're running out of water. You can't keep growing cotton in Australia. The Aral Sea is dried up. So all of these sort of pressures are starting to come our way now, and they're only going to get bigger with 11 billion. So if you're a business that's thinking about its future, you need to plan in a future where you need to retain the resources that you're using rather than, keep buying new ones, because you're going to run out.
So, but then I think you run into a massive challenge, right? Because if you ask people to just look back a little bit at the history you have of Earth Hour. If you ask people to turn out the light for 1 hour, I guess a lot of people would be eligible to say yes, no problem. It's a small effort they can make. Either if they're companies or consumers.
No, I agree.
But then if you're asking Apple or textile companies to change their entire business model, it's a completely different thing.
No,
even
look,
for consumers to buy in a different way, or to go and rent your clothes, or
yeah, no, look, I mean, I agree. It's a systemic change.
yeah.
But if you take something like the COP21 Paris Agreement, right? You've got an agreement there where, if you think of it as a sort of pie, how much have we got to go find? About 50% of the commitments made in Paris are currently agreed to by governments around the world. So pretty amazing thing to have signed that agreement. Really important to have signed it. But we've so far only found 50% of what's required to keep temperatures under 1.5 degrees. So then you start to look and go, so how are we going to do the rest by 2030, right? So how are you going to do the rest? And when you start dividing that pie up, you basically you come across that you have to start looking at systemic change. So not just renewables, not just efficiency, but how do you rebuild the way the economy runs? And that has to be around keeping products back in the chain, so you're not digging up more stuff, you're not burning more coal, all of those different things. So I think you're absolutely right. It's really hard to see how that's going to happen if you think of it as of today. But if you're a company that's planning ahead, you are planning, what do I do? How do I get resources? How am I going to build a business that's going to survive 20, 30 years ahead? So to give you one example, I was told by someone at Ford in China that if they had the same market penetration in terms of numbers of cars per person in China that they have in the States, they'd have to concrete the whole of China to park all those cars.
Whoa.
So there's a completely different reason why you've got to change your business model, right? And I think that's the thing. When you start to think 11 billion people, when you start to think we're running out of the resources, they're becoming more expensive and prices are fluctuating, you start to see the risk. And I think what circular economy starts to show is you have less risk when you go circular. So if you're a business, that's important. If you're a pension company, that's important. Who do you want to invest in? Ones with less risk for the future. And I think that kind of, you say, take that across pretty much every part of industry, even the advertising industry. You can't keep going down the road of the consumer will keep on buying product after product. Can they buy service after service instead? And you start to see those trends happening with Airbnb or with Spotify. You no longer have a CD collection. You have Spotify, right?
That's it, yeah. So we see those changes. Yeah. Some companies, they already run on circular concepts. But still, a lot of work needs to be done to change those big, gigantic, colossal companies that run in this old theme, right? We can take the next tweet. It was at Rockstar Accelerator. You were also presenting there, and this year, right? The Netherlands was called out as a hotspot for the circular economy. So, are we going to create those systematic changes? We're going to do that from Holland. That's
well, I mean, look, I'm from Australia, and I moved to Holland because there's nowhere else on the planet, I think, who's doing this as well as the Netherlands. So you are a hotspot. What's interesting is starting to see other hotspots arrive as well. So Scotland, I think, is likely to be one as well.
Yeah, okay.
And I hope that happens. I hope there's sort of a race between all these different countries of who's trying to do this better and who's going to try and improve on each other. But one of the good things about circularity is that the more practical, real examples you get, the more you inspire others to do the same. And when you start to see business models that are working and people are essentially making money out of them, then you'll see other people trying to copy them.
Because
that is happening.
That was a next tweet that I saw. This is from the Circle Economy. Is it a company? Is it an organization? How should we?
It's a sort of hybrid of cooperative foundation and social enterprise. All right. So it's kind of interestingly Dutch.
Yeah, it's a Dutchy thing.
I don't know what we had that in Australia, probably not. Yeah.
Because the financial barriers, could you say if we overcoming them, it means pretty much the same as showing people that it's a completely more sustainable way of making your money.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that, another way of describing it, sometimes described as decoupling the use of resources with prosperity. So you can still get rich whilst not using all the resources because you've got this kind of circular thing going all the time. But I don't know whether that refers more to, I mean, there are financial barriers in the way, and they could be things like procurement rules if you're trying to light a city using circular business models. The old procurement rules would say, no, we have to buy the light bulbs.
Yeah.
A circular model would be, we'll pay an organisation to provide the lighting for the city, and that'll be a 10, 15-year contract. And what the organisation that provides the lighting would then do is will design everything for longevity and everything to be really efficient, because they're going to pay the cost. So it's a kind of, I don't know if that's too kind of complicated, but that's,
yeah, well, it means that also, how you say that responsibilities are shifting, right? Because I think in the linear system, the responsibility of a supplier stops at the moment that the money is transferred.
Yeah, once he sold it. Yeah.
And then it's done. And in these kind of constructions, I guess it also asks from suppliers to be much more responsible for the product.
Well, it's in their interest to be responsible.
Yeah.
And that's the key to it. It's not just a kind of policy thing. It's, you know, if you're Philips and you're providing lighting as a service, and you know you're going to get that light bulb back or that lighting system back, you will design it so you won't just get it back and then scrap it. You'll be able to design it so that you can deconstruct it, use every single component again, replace anything that's failed, which may only be, you know, 1% of the total product, and redo it. And you could apply that to anything. So if you think about something like a trainer, like a shoe, a running shoe. Design now, if you take something like a Nike shoe, those shoes are knit. They knit them.
Yeah.
So instead of having large amounts of cut off when you build a shoe, it just cuts it off at the end because it's knitted. So suddenly you've got zero waste on the actual thing. Go to the next stage if you apply circular principles, and it would be, okay, I don't sell that shoe to you as a runner. I want to essentially lease that shoe to you. In a year's time, when you've run many, many kilometres in that shoe and it's kind of a bit worn out, you bring it back to the shop. You're incentivised to do that. They've designed that shoe so they can take it apart, use all the components again, use the knit again. So they basically totally recycle every element of the shoe, and you get the new shoe. So they then also get customer loyalty out of it. So almost in every kind of aspect of life, you can apply the ethos, and then it's up to you to work out how to capitalise on that.
On a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being a complete circular economy, preferably worldwide, where are we now?
We're really at the beginning. And but I would say, from my perspective, I've been in the Netherlands for a year, and in that year, globally, what we've seen is a really massive growth in interest in this. So there are some of the world's biggest companies now are investing really heavily in circularity and circular business models and how they change their production lines. So from Unilever to Philips, you know, they're very big companies doing that. So the growth is happening. You're starting to see some startups and some disruptive ideas coming through. And even Airbnb, in effect, is a circular idea. It's taking your spare room in your house and going, right, well, that has a value, but it's sitting there not being used. How can I bring that value back? So that's now, you know, in scale about the same size as the Hilton Group of hotels, right? So that's like building a Hilton Group size load of hotels without having to build them, if that makes sense.
So if we're talking the money side of things, then I guess this must be, for companies, must be the reason to start moving, right? If you're a company and you haven't been, because I know many examples of companies that are busy with circularity, but still also much more that are not.
Yeah,
so
exactly right.
This is on the company side, but then back to the consumer side, the people that you've reached so successfully with Earth Hour. Yeah. How do we get them into these concepts? Because
it's a great question.
For me, it would be okay to lease my jeans. It's already possible, I know, and to lease my running shoes, but. Yeah, I guess a lot of people still want to own stuff, right?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I mean, and there's a lot of assumptions in these conversations. So we've actually just started doing some quite significant work around working out what is the role of the millennial? What is the role of women in this? What is the role of even the baby boomers, you know? And to be honest with you, I don't think anyone's got there. I think there's a lot of assumptions. I think there's a lot of assumptions that the adoption of the shared economy is kind of a done deal. But, you know, we've got an aging population. So you only have to look at where people vote and you'll see the aging population is incredibly powerful. You know, if you take the UK and the Brexit thing going on at the moment, the aging population will be the people who decide what goes on here. And so I think we've got a lot of assumptions to overcome, but I think one really, really interesting thing here is that the creative industries, the ad industry particularly, has had its own problems. So they've gone from digital advertising to data-driven advertising, and now even more horrible for them is the search for authenticity. So you've got this sort of three kind of really big, challenging things to big ad agencies. Now, it wouldn't be interesting if you could work out, can ad agencies start to apply the kind of 5 big business models to their clients? Can they have a conversation which is more than awareness around how do you look at the client, the customer in a really different way, and how do you start to sell, you know, jeans as to be leased? How do you start? And I don't think that's happened. I don't think the advertising industry is anywhere near this topic yet. And I believe that, I mean, we're working on this already. This will be a big project for us over the next year. But I think that's that could be a really big tipping point.
Yeah, to reach out to the consumers.
Yeah, because who reaches out to them better?
Yeah. Obviously, the circular economy, we're at 1 now, at 2, working on to a 10, right?
Yeah.
And
just coming off 1 would probably be about where I put it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so your last note of this interview, what would be your hope? What do you hope to have reached when you, in a couple of years, would leave the circular economy?
Good question.
Where would we be there? At a 3 or 5?
Yeah, Look, I mean, what we're focusing on, and we've made this a really, really kind of central theme for circular economy here in the Netherlands, is practical and scalable. So I always think with this stuff, there's a big danger in it being too rhetorical, you know, so big numbers, there's trillions of dollars here and, you know, tens of thousands of jobs here. But I am a massive believer, and I learned this through the Earth Hour experience, that if you can get stuff happening on the ground, then that's where you start to get real momentum. So for me, in my job, and for us as an organisation, practical and scalable. Build everything so that it's really practical, you can see it working, and make sure you can scale it. So really rely on digital, rely on the ability to connect that we've, you know, as I said, first generation is able to do that. And I think so practical, scalable, really big for us. And we've focused on cities and sectors like textiles to try and see that happen. And the other part of that is back to your last question around the consumer or the citizen. And I think we can make big breakthroughs there. And we haven't done yet, but I think I said at the beginning, everyone underestimates the power of the crowd. But if you can work out how to tap into that, if you can empower the crowd and provide the tools and the network for them to connect, then you can kind of step back and see what happens, and that's kind of when exciting things tend to change the world.
Andy Ridley, thank you for coming.
Pleasure, mate.
I hope you liked this interview. If you did, please share it to your friends. And if you want more content, go to 7ditches.tv. More English content will also show up there. And please don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter. You get all the interviews in your inbox for free. See you next time.